EPA ends vehicle GHG standards, resetting fleet and environmental risk strategy. Protection Agency announced the elimination of the 2009 greenhouse gas (GHG) endangerment finding and all associated federal vehicle GHG standards covering model years 2012 and beyond. The action, delivered by Administrator Lee Zeldin, follows Supreme Court rulings including Loper Bright Enterprises vs. Raimondo and West Virginia v. EPA that narrowed federal agency authority. The administration estimates the repeal will reduce regulatory costs by more than $1.3 trillion and lower average vehicle costs by roughly $2,400. But the endangerment finding was not merely a compliance tool. It provided the legal basis for federal regulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from vehicles, a sector that represents approximately 29% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, making transportation the largest emitting sector, according to prior EPA inventories. Its removal therefore shifts not only compliance cost assumptions, but environmental trajectory assumptions embedded in capital markets and infrastructure planning. What vehicle emissions historically meant for health and environment? Federal vehicle GHG standards were originally justified on both climate and public health grounds. According to earlier EPA regulatory impact analyses tied to vehicle standards, the light-duty vehicle standards finalized during the Obama administration were projected to reduce billions of metric tons of CO2 over the vehicle's lifetimes. EPA modeling previously associated transportation emissions reductions with avoided premature deaths and reduced respiratory illness due to co-benefits from lower particulate matter and ozone formation. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has long identified fine particulate pollution, PM2.5, as contributing to asthma, cardiovascular disease, and premature mortality. Globally, the World Health Organization (WHO) estimates that air pollution contributes to roughly 7 million premature deaths annually, though that figure encompasses all pollution sources, not just vehicles. Greenhouse gases themselves do not cause direct respiratory illness in the way particulate matter does. However, climate-driven heat events, wildfire intensity, and extreme weather have been associated with secondary public health risks, including increased emergency room visits during heat waves. The policy debate now shifts to whether eliminating federal GHG standards materially changes those long-term projections, and how much weight corporate capital planning assigns to those risks independent of regulation. Early organizational responses. While formal litigation and structured responses are still emerging, several categories of stakeholders are expected to weigh in. Environmental advocacy organizations have historically defended the endangerment finding as the legal backbone of federal climate policy. State regulators in jurisdictions that previously aligned with more stringent vehicle standards may pursue independent pathways. Automotive trade associations and some industry groups have previously argued that regulatory predictability, even when stringent, is preferable to rapid policy swings. Investors are also unlikely to treat this solely as a deregulatory relief event. Major institutional asset managers continue to assess transition risk exposure and portfolio decarbonization trajectories independent of federal mandates. The divergence between federal policy and market expectations may widen rather than narrow. Fleet economics and environmental risk modeling now diverge. With federal GHG standards eliminated, compliance-driven EV adoption timelines may slow in some sectors. Internal carbon pricing models may need adjustment. Long-term emissions forecasting embedded in sustainability reporting may require recalibration. However, transportation emissions remain a material portion of corporate Scope 1 and Scope 3 inventories. Many large buyers continue to require emissions disclosure and supplier decarbonization pathways. The result is a bifurcated risk environment. Short-term compliance costs may decline. Long-term climate exposure modeling may remain unchanged in investor analysis. For CFOs, this introduces a tension between near-term cost relief and long-term transition positioning. Infrastructure investment is now a capital choice, not a mandate. Charging infrastructure, grid interconnections, and fleet electrification hubs were often justified on regulatory inevitability. Now leadership teams must distinguish projects driven by compliance necessity, projects justified by fuel cost savings, projects aligned with customer expectations, projects tied to voluntary climate commitments. Infrastructure assets are long-lived. Policy cycles are not. The EPA's action does not eliminate environmental risk. It changes who prices it and how quickly. Executive pressure test. Finance leaders should immediately model. What happens to fleet ROI assumptions if gasoline and diesel remain dominant longer? How do internal carbon accounting assumptions shift? Does reputational exposure increase if environmental organizations mount coordinated legal or public campaigns? How do state-level standards affect multi-state operators? Regulatory stability previously reduced planning variables. Policy volatility increases them. The capital event. The repeal of vehicle GHG standards is being described as the largest deregulatory action in U.S. history. For capital markets and corporate finance, it represents something different: a recalibration of long-term emissions assumptions, public health risk modeling, and infrastructure deployment timing. The compliance obligation may ease. The strategic uncertainty increases. Organizations that treat this solely as cost relief may underprice environmental, investor, and reputational risk. Those that treat it solely as environmental regression may miss short-term capital efficiency gains. The reset is not ideological, it is financial. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.